What's going on, everybody? My name is Jason and I work at All Out Bikes, and what we have here is we have a fairly new giant Talon, and it's using a Shimano crank with square taper bottom bracket. And what's going on is it's making a lot of creaking noise. So let me see if I can recreate this for you to hear, because when the customer rides it, it gets really annoying. So let's see if we can hear it. Now, as you can see and hear, this is very annoying whenever you're trying to ride in the woods or with friends. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pull the crank arms off. We're going to pull the bottom bracket out, clean it, grease it, tighten it to the proper spec, and send the customer on his way. But we're going to be doing this step by step live, so you can actually see how long this actually takes. This is not it's not too difficult as long as you have the proper tools. Now, it is nice to have a Park Tool repair stand. Of course, any repair stand will do. If you don't have a repair stand, you can turn the bike upside down and do the same job. The other tool that you're going to need is we're going to be using a Park Tool CCP-22 crank puller for this job, because this is for square taper cranks. The other tool that we need is we need a BB20 socket tool for the bottom bracket. It's a special key to remove the bottom bracket, and we need a good torque wrench here as well. And we're going to be using some blue Loctite for this job, for the crank bolts, not for the bottom bracket. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to get that 8mm Allen that I did not mention earlier that you need. So we're going to go ahead and turn this counterclockwise to remove it. So we remove the bolt here. We're going to be using this crank puller. We're going to thread this in. Now, I like to make sure that the press and the outer thread is fairly equal. So we're going to screw this in. We're going to make sure that it is locked in place. You don't need to make it really tight. And then just go ahead and remove the crank. That came off kind of easily, and I can already see, because there is grease on the spindle. Let me get this thing straight. You do not grease square spindles. You can call up Shimano, they'll tell you the same thing. I don't know who put this thing together. You do not put any grease on those spindles. It's a dry fit. The only place that you're going to put grease on there is maybe on some of the, like the bolt head, but no grease on the spindle. Okay, so now that the crank arm is off, we're going to unlock the tool here, and we're going to remove the other side. And it's no different than the side that we just did. We're going to break free the crank arm bolt. Keep in mind, this is real time. Screw the crank arm in, the crank arm tool, I should say. Lock it in place. Not too hard, just enough. And remove the crank arm. And this one's coming off pretty easily as well. and somebody greased this one as well. The problem with greasing the crank arms, this is a square tapered spindle, and what happens is when you're riding and hitting bumps, the crank arm tends to go a little bit more onto the spindle, causing the bolt on the end that keeps the crank arm on to loosen up. And then what happens is the bolt will start to back off and the crank arm gets loose and you ruin a crank arm. We will be using blue Loctite on the crank bolt today, just in case if the crank arm does slide on a little bit more, it's going to keep the bolt from actually loosening up and backing out. Now, I've been told, and I believe this, once every few months you really want to get a tool and just check to make sure that your crank arms are not loose. You don't need to tighten them a lot, just make sure that they're not getting loose. So now we're going to go ahead and get our BB20 bottom bracket tool, and you know what, we don't use torque wrenches to loosen this. Let's just see if this is loose. The bottom bracket is supposed to be tightened to between 35 and 55 Newton meters, which is like 310 inch-pounds, almost all the way up to 450 or 500. I do know it's supposed to be 35 to 55, depending on the situation. Now, this cup right here is actually a composite plastic, and this one you're definitely going to tighten it on the looser side. Now we're going to take a look at the bottom bracket, and you actually want to remove the non-shoulder side first. So on this one, the drive side, this one actually has a shoulder on it. I'm going to look over on the other side. The other side does not have a shoulder on it, so we're going to actually remove the non-drive side first. I'm going to be using the torque wrench. Don't use the torque wrench, I just want to see if this side is loose. So we're going to be removing this cup, and I am checking to see, actually that bottom bracket cup was in at about 45 Newton meters, which is good. So let's go ahead and remove this one, and then we're going to remove the drop side. Okay, so this is a composite cup, so this is going to be, whenever we reinstall it, it's going to be on the lower end of the spec. Okay, so now that the non-drive side has been removed, let's go ahead and loosen up this drive side. And we're going to get this torque wrench and we're going to test it. And that was about 35. It was a little on the loose side, but it is a composite cup as well. So it's interesting that this is making some noise with two composite cups. But I'm inspecting this bottom bracket, and actually you can see that it's very dry. So we're going to be using some Park Tool Polylube grease, which is supposed to be non-harmful to composite materials, and that should help keep this thing nice and quiet. Now what we're going to do is we want to get a fairly clean rag, and we actually want to clean this bottom bracket really good, making sure there's no debris inside of this bottom bracket. You want to clean both sides really good. And would you look at that? That's nice and clean. You want to make sure that the bottom bracket is clean. Make sure that you clean the spindle really good. We want zero grease on that. Now let's go ahead and get this bottom bracket cleaned up really good. Make sure that all dirt and debris is off. Make sure that the spindle is completely free of any grease whatsoever, because this is supposed to be a dry fit. We're going to make sure that both sides of the cup are good and clean. If you've got a little bit of dirt on the outside, that's okay. Just make sure that the inside is really clean. Now that the cups are clean and the frame is clean, we're going to put some of this Park Tool grease inside of the bottom bracket here on both sides. You know, I normally don't put any grease whatsoever on this composite shell, but we're going to put a little bit on the shell, and we're also going to put some on the sealed bearing surface right here. And then we're going to go ahead and hand thread this bottom bracket into the frame. What you want to do is you want to actually thread in the side with the shoulder first. So I'm going to start to turn it the wrong way, which is going to be clockwise, to try to catch the threads in the frame. And what I'm doing is I'm feeling for a little click, and then we're going to go ahead and thread it in the proper way, which is reverse threaded. And notice it's threading in quite easily by hand. I'm going to put a tiny bit of grease on the threads. Now, I shouldn't have to do this, but this is not hurting anything because this grease does not damage this plastic. The only reason why I'm putting it in there is because aluminum does corrode, and this does help make it a little bit quieter. Alright, so now that the drive side is threaded in most of the way, I'm going to go ahead and go backwards on this cup until I feel a snap, which I did. Then I'm going to go ahead and start threading it in the proper way, and see, it should easily thread in by hand. Okay, and I'm going to thread it in until I start to feel it touch the bearing. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get our torque wrench. So let's go ahead and get this tightened up. And what we're going to be going for is, I want to go for about 40 Newton meters. That's 38. I'm happy with 38. And then let's tighten the non-drive side here. And the non-drive side, we're going to be going clockwise. So in this case, righty-tighty. I feel it pressing on the bearing. Okay. And we're going to be tightening it between 35 and 40 Newton meters. Being that it's a composite, we want it to be on the lower end of the scale. Okay. Now that the bottom bracket is in, I'm going to go ahead and wipe off any excess grease from both sides, because we got grease. Okay, I'm going to find a good clean spot on this rag, clean the spindle again, no grease. We're going to get the crank and we're going to clean the grease out of the crank. That's good. That's one. We're going to go ahead and slide this into place. Let's get the other crank arm. We're going to clean the grease out of this. Okay, that looks good. Slide that on. Alright, so now I like to get a little bit of grease on the edge, the shoulder of the bolt. So I do like to put a little bit of grease on the shoulder here. And then I'm going to get some of this blue Loctite and we're going to put it on the threads. You don't need too much. That was actually probably a little bit too much, but it'll be alright. So if you want to know the actual torque specs on the crank arm, it's supposed to be between 34 and 44 Newton meters. This one we're going to go probably a little bit tighter until we feel it hit the shoulder of this bottom bracket. So, which shouldn't be super tight. And actually I felt it make contact there, and then we're just going to snug it a little bit more. And then we're going to do the same thing to the other crank bolt, wherever it went to. It's over here. So just like the other one, we're going to put a little bit of grease onto the shoulder. Just a little bit of grease on that shoulder. None on the threads. And then a little bit of blue Loctite. Okay, so on the non-drive, we're going to need to tighten that crank arm to anywhere from, well, 34 to 44 Newton meters. So I'm going to get my torque wrench, and we're going to tighten this one properly, because there is no shoulder on this one. Thread it in, and tighten it up a little bit. Let's get that torque wrench. So we're going to get our handy dandy torque wrench. I've got my 8mm bit here. Let's go ahead and tighten this. So let's tighten this to 40. Okay, that's 40. Now I'm going to come over here and just make sure that we're at, oh yeah, we're at or past the 45 Newton meters. All right, so let's see if we can hear this noise anymore. Seems to be pretty quiet. Okay, here's another thing I like to do. See, now that we've got this tightened to the proper spec, if you take it out for a test ride and play around with it and jump off a couple of curbs, kind of play around with it, recheck the torque spec, but we need to do this immediately before the Loctite dries. Or you can put the bike on the ground and with the crank level with the ground, right foot forward, I'm going to bounce on the bike. Okay, then I'm going to flip the crank around to the left foot forward, bounce on it, right foot, and then let's recheck the torque spec, and I think you'll find that the cranks are now looser. Okay, let's check, and yep, it dropped down to 35, so it lost 10 Newton meters. Let's go ahead and tighten this. Okay, there we go. I doubt this side has loosened up any because it's up against the shoulder. Nope, it didn't move. Okay. Let's see if we hear any noise. Still. This seems to be good and quiet. Bottom bracket's not moving. I don't feel any shifting. So we're good. So as you can see, servicing a bottom bracket on a bike is actually pretty easy. Now there's several bottom brackets out there. Keep in mind, this is a video on servicing an English style square spindle bottom bracket. So the bottom bracket actually threads into this frame, and it's using the English threads. There's several other type bottom brackets. There's Italian, which is going to be different. There's BB30, which is a pressed in. So there's several other bottom brackets. So if your bottom bracket is not the same as this, then what I've told you does not apply. So just keep that in mind. Now, if you did enjoy the video, if it was helpful in any way, please leave me a big thumbs up. Don't forget to tell your friends. Check out some of the other videos on the corner of the screen. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.